Hello, my name is Tori,
I'm Leslie.
I'm Alejandro.
and we are the Phi Theta Kappa College Project Committee. Every year, PTK works on 2 projects. The first focuses on the college project, and the second one focuses on the HIA.
Our college project this year focuses on the students' health, especially during these unprecedented times we are going through. With that in mind, we have created a 3-part series workshop that focuses on the mental, nutritional, and physical health of the students in their own individual video. We have a special message from the president of College of the Mainland, Dr. Nichols.
Hello, I'm Warren Nichols, President of College of the Mainland, and on behalf of the students in our Phi Theta Kappa chapter, we are happy to present to you today the mental health issues that are confronting our nation. Whether you are a student, a faculty member, or a senior leader of our campus, or in our community, we are all struggling with the issues of today. This segment will help you and us deal with the issues of mental health, what we can do to prevent those, and how we can address those. Doug Alvarez, one of our faculty members and sponsor of PTK, will be conducting this series with you today. And again, on behalf of PTK and College of the Mainland, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, President Nichols. We appreciate all the support you have given Phi Theta Kappa throughout the years. This wouldn't be possible without you. You're watching the first video of our 3-part series workshop. To help advocate for mental health, we have Professor Alvarez.
Hello everyone. Welcome to one of the PTK virtual workshops on mind, body, and soul. My name is Douglas Alvarez, and I'm one of the professors here at College of the Mainland in the Social Behavioral Sciences Department where I teach psychology. Today, we will be talking about the mind, or more specifically, stress and mental health. When we look at this, we're going to break it down into a couple of different focus areas. The first one being stress and its sources. Then, how you have stress as a student, how to reduce stress, and then we're going to end with a student Q&A where I answer some of the questions that were submitted by other College of the Mainland students to PTK. So to get started, we have to discuss stress and where it comes from. The reason why we're going to discuss this first is because in order to understand stress, we really need to kind of dive deep into what the definition is, and more importantly, where does it come from? Because if we ever want to get a good handle on it, whether that be through our personal lives or just a general knowledge of how to help others, we really need to understand what it is. So when we look at stress, we have to understand that it's usually going to be based on when people are asked to handle more than what they're used to. But that being said, it is not an inability to cope. It is just an unfamiliarity with the situation. Meaning that as we move forward through this presentation, we're eventually going to discuss some of the ways that you become more familiar with stress. And therefore, by becoming more familiar, you can then figure out ways to cope with the situation itself. So as we do this, I really want you to not only look at the definition on the right, but I also want you to think about when did you last stress in the past, and when do you think it will happen again in the future? If you keep these 2 questions on the front end of your mind, it's going to really help us understand how stress can affect you and how you can utilize some of the things you learn here to make things better in the future. So first, looking at the definition, what we have to understand is stress is going to be both a physical and a psychological reaction, meaning that we have to kind of break this understanding down into 2 pieces. The first being the physical or physiological reactions from stress. These will be based on your autonomic nervous system. Hopefully you've taken a psychology class, but if not, it's all of the automatic bodily functions within you. Heart rate, breathing, sweating, blood pressure, muscle tension, all these different things that exist. What we start to see is that when we deal with stress, you can kind of have this understanding that all of these autonomic functions, all of these automatic functions in your body increase. Your heart rate increases, your breathing increases, your perspiration or sweating increases, blood pressure increases, muscle tension increases. Sleeping decreases because of cognitive issues, which we'll talk about in a second. But understanding these physical reactions and kind of seeing where they are will help us discuss how to treat stress and how to reduce it in the future. Meaning that if we see the physical reactions that include increased heart rate, well, how do we bring our heart rate down? Increased breathing. Well, how do we bring our breathing down? Increased blood pressure, muscle tension, ulcer, fatigue, all these things. How do we specifically identify these different areas of stress to reduce them, which then, by definition, will reduce the amount of stress we feel? The second part that we have to understand is the psychological reactions to stress. Depression, anger, overwhelmness, mood swings, forgetfulness, and so on. These are a result of stress in more of a cognitive sense. Later on in this presentation, we're going to talk about the difference between depression and sadness. We're going to talk about the difference between the diagnosis of depression or the disorder of depression and feeling depressed. But again, understanding how stress can result in feeling sad, feeling angry, feeling overwhelmed. These are all things that majority of people can relate to because it's something that we've dealt with as not only a student, but also maybe as a significant other in a relationship, as a brother, sister, father, mother, cousin, aunt, uncle, grandparent in a family, and also even as a coworker or a worker at a business. So we have to understand that stress affects us both physically and psychologically. And that being said, the more that we can understand the little pieces of the physical reactions, the little pieces of the psychological reactions, the better we can confront these. So when we look at this, we also have to understand not only the definition of what stress is, but also where does the stress come from? And there are 4 very specific sources of stress. The first being environmental, meaning the world around you can influence the amount of stress that you feel. Your environment can affect your physical reactions. Pollution can affect breathing. Your environment can affect your psychological. Crowding, inability to focus. Traffic can increase emotions of anger, increase emotions of frustration, and so on. The physiological sources of stress come from illness, hormonal fluctuations, inadequate sleep, and inadequate nutrition. How many times in your life has somebody said, how do you reduce stress? How do you feel better? Get more sleep and eat better. I mean, we can, again, identify areas that we know will help reduce stress in terms of the physiological or physical components, but is it something we actually put into play? That's what we're going to talk about a little bit later in this presentation. We have cognitive issues with stress, cognitive sources of stress, the way you think, optimism, pessimism, whether you're open to new experiences or closed off, whether you are more sociable or you prefer to be alone, negative self-talk. I can't do this. I can't do this. I'm not good at this. Everybody that's taken a math class in the past several years have probably told yourself at one point, I'm just not good at math. Or maybe in an English class, I'm not good at writing. These negative self-talk can actually increase the amount of stress that you feel in those classes due to the way that you think about them. Catastrophizing situations, making something small into some grand, huge, wide-scale event. And the easiest way to put this into play is to think about when you were younger and maybe in a relationship, or if you wanted to be in a relationship and that person didn't reciprocate feelings or they broke up with you. It was, 6th grade me. It was the end of the world that so-and-so didn't like me or that so-and-so broke up with me. Whereas now we kind of understand that some of these situations are very small problems, very small sources of stress. Instead, we might see money as this gigantic issue, grades, attendance, friendships. So we need to really kind of rein in that level of catastrophizing and rein in that feeling of the world is going to end because of one specific situation. perfectionism, again, as a student who attends virtual workshops, I'm sure this is something that you probably deal with. Because if you attend virtual workshops to learn more about stress, it's probably because you want to be better. And for a lot of us, it doesn't end with just wanting to be better. It ends with wanting to be perfect. But again, there is no end goal in perfectionism. We can continually get better in our life. And if we focus on perfection, it's something that we will never reach. So when we think about stress, we want to understand a lot of kind of the realistic nature of our goals. So you'll see this a lot in this presentation, where in order to kind of combat this level of perfectionism, we really just have to think more realistically about our situation, about our problems, and about what we want in life. And then lastly, pig thinking. And this comes from more of a cognitive behavioral approach. And what it means is that the problems that we deal with are permanent, they're unchanging, that they're internal, they're due to something that's internally bad with you, and that they're general because of your general competence towards a situation. So if you fail a test, pig thinking would say, let's start with permanent. I fail a test, I'm never going to pass this class. It's internal. I'm too stupid. I don't understand it. In general, I will never understand it. I will never get better. This class will never be for me. So pig thinking can affect, again, very strongly the level of psychological stress that you're dealing with. Then lastly, some of the last source of stress is our social world. So financial problems, loss of or lack of a job, school versus work demands, how we balance that, social events, losing a loved one, peer pressure, and now quarantining and maybe loneliness and, understanding people's level of comfortability with interacting with others during this time of COVID. So we're going to start to see that when we understand stress and we try to kind of not only understand the definition, but also the sources, we need to understand that it's only going to be harmful when it's excessive. Most stress in small amounts can actually help us get better. If we feel psychological stress, I don't understand this. This is really hard. This is really difficult. Then with positive self-thinking, you can actually come out of that better than what you were. I just need to study more. I need to get help. Physical reactions. I'm so tired. I can't focus. My mind is groggy. Well, how do we react? Sleep more. Eat better. And so on. So these small amounts of stress have always made us get better. And when we start to think about it, stress is great because it does actually help stimulate our life. Without stress, life would be boring. If we were prepared for every situation in a relationship, every situation in a friendship, every situation through our academic learning, things would be boring. So instead, what we have to understand is while stress is good in small amounts, we have to make sure that we manage it appropriately so that from stress, we find growth as opposed to finding kind of failure and standoffishness from it. So as a student, I'll give you about 3 seconds, because this is a virtual workshop, to think, what does it mean to be stressed as a student? And then we're going to move on to kind of focus in on what that means. So what this means is that for most people, college should be some of the best times in your life. Of course, minus COVID, because that kind of put a wrench into everything. These years are going to be especially critical for how you cope with situations, how you adjust. You're going to have new situations, bigger choices, more control over your life. And more importantly, you're going to have a lot at stake with how you figure out these issues. When you look at friendships from the past, when you look at relationships from the past and compare them to where you're at now, there are a lot of times where these things do not align. When you start to think about what your choices are in the future, jobs, occupations, career choices, family choices, and so on, also, you might not be working towards those goals right now. So stress in a student is inevitable because of the amount of coping that you have to deal with, the amount of new situations that are going to come up. And like we said, the bigger choices that you have as an adult. What this means is that as we start to kind of examine some of the ways that you get stressed in student life, almost at the top is going to be academic demands. Why? Because while most people went through high school education a little differently, once you get to college, you start to see that it is very much a kind of self-realizing goal. Like, how much effort do I put in determines how much, what kind of grade I get. So that level of focus can actually be difficult for some. And more importantly, being in a new academic environment with new responsibilities, Blackboard, submitting assignments online, attending tutoring, writing an MLA versus APA, all these things start to become levels of stress in our social world and then in our cognitive world, where we start to see kind of stress levels rise. Changes in family and social relationships. This is probably one of the more difficult ones. Why? Because you have now moved on into a level of adulthood that kind of leaves your parents behind. The social relationships that you have in high school may have been kind of forged in the household. Your parents knew who they were. Your parents met them. Whereas the college environment, you may work with a classmate through tutoring, through classwork, through virtual meetups, who you will never introduce to your parents, who your parents will never know of. Your social relationships change because we start to see that at the beginning of college, whether this is your first year, second year, or so on, your friend group divulged. They separated when high school ended. You gave a hug at the end of graduation, thinking that you would stay connected and that we would, be friends forever. And while that might be the case for some, a lot of us, they went off, we went off, and now we don't speak, or we speak minimally during holidays, birthdays, through social media. But now we might actually find ourselves lost. We have this identity in high school. We have this identity with our friendships, but now that's gone. So we start to see, again, that's another level of stress in your student life. New people, new ideas, a lot of times, temptations, a lot of times our parents kind of dictate who we are up until early and late adolescence, meaning that they choose who we hang out with, they choose what we can watch, what we eat, what we can read, and so on. And now you're presented with information from all over, different classes, different perspectives, different people. And now that can lead to a level of stress because you might be questioning some of the things your parents taught you, some of the things that you hold as core beliefs. And on the flip side, you might be trying to fight to show others what your core beliefs are, trying to fight to show others that what you were taught is what was right. And that's easy, again, to be brought up in a psychology class when we talk about things such as sexuality, when we talk about physical punishment like spanking, when we talk about substance use like alcohol, and when we talk about vaccines. You can actually see that this exposure to new people can actually lead to a level of stress, a small amount of it, that can cause one to feel uncomfortable. But again, we have to combat this. And then, of course, not good sleep, procrastination, and more importantly, preparing for life after graduation. Some people have a very small perspective of what you're doing as a student, but you have to understand that every single decision you make right now during your college years is in preparation for life after graduation more than it is for life during school. And that is an existential crisis a lot of people deal with in college, especially as they get closer towards the end of finishing their degree. In addition to all these things, your psychological makeup, as we said earlier, your cognitive kind of approach to the world, your mindset, whether it's that growth or that fixed mindset that we talk about in Psychology for Success, whether your self-esteem is high or it's low, you're pessimistic, optimistic, these can actually affect how you react to the stressful situations and even can lead to issues with depression or sadness, as we'll start to kind of discuss in the future. We see that people who do have these low levels of self-esteem, who view themselves in the world with pessimism, are going to be overwhelmed by the stress. Again, not something that you want to be a part of, but definitely something that you will see throughout your college experience. You will see people drop classes. You will see people give up. You will see people drop out of college entirely. You will see people come back. Then you will see them leave again. And then you have to kind of understand, well, what does that mean for you as a student? How do you kind of identify where you fall in this relationship with education? And that, again, high levels of stress as a student. I apologize if I'm giving any existential problems as y'all listen to this. And understanding stress is important. The definition, the physical and psychological problems that might arise, the sources that we discuss, the environmental, the physical, the cognitive, the social, but also learning how to cope with these demands will actually help kind of better not only you as a student, but also better you as a person. Because as you start to grow and as you start to kind of expand your social expectations, as you expand your career expectations, as you expand your academic expectations, your level of coping becomes very, very important in trying to understand stress and your student life. Now, here comes the point where we kind of take a step back. Hopefully you're feeling a little bit of a level of stress about, you as a student and your environment, and maybe it's loud where you're listening, maybe it's too quiet. But now we kind of talk about how to reduce stress. And again, this will be just as important. When we look at reducing stress, the first thing you have to do is understand what's causing it and looking for ways to reduce it. Your stress may be a result of friendships, family, academics, work, and you need to figure out ways to reduce it on your own. The reality is that there are no general answers outside of eat better, sleep better, be optimistic, and open to new experiences. Other than that, if you're trying to balance work and school, if you're trying to balance family and work and school, the situation is unique to yourself because you have a specific level of coping skills that you either need to increase, or if you have an adequate level of coping skills, you need to put into practice. So the ways that you can actually reduce stress is to kind of, again, identify specifically what it is that's causing the problem. Sometimes that's easy, switching schools, switching majors, failing a class. Other times it's difficult. Other times you may feel stressed in a general sense of the world. And you don't know whether that's coming from school, you don't know whether it's coming from work, you don't know whether that's coming from family. In fact, all those things might be going well, but you still might feel stressed due to just the overwhelming demand of attention that all of these require, pulling you from here to there and here to there, here to there. So, identifying these stressors is very important. Trying to get rid of stress will cause stress. Again, you want to cope with the stress. If you try to completely remove stress from your life, you might never be in a relationship again. You might never take another class. You might never ever start another job because stress is there. So trying to identify ways to get rid of stress can actually lead to more stress itself. So instead, cope with it. Figure out how you can overcome it. Figure out how you can address the stressors themselves. And more importantly, try to manage those symptoms and make them kind of, try to reduce them in your life. Learning better ways to manage your time. This will satisfy almost all levels of stress. Why? Because you can actually get more done, have more free time, which actually can lead to low levels of stress as a student. Prioritizing is key. You cannot, and I cannot stress this enough, I've said it many times in my classes and to students who ask me for help, you cannot put a job in front of school because eventually your school, your degree plan will lead to your career. The thing that you want in the future, unfortunately, requires sacrifices in the present. So make sure that you prioritize academics first, if that's what you're looking for. If you have a family, prioritize family. But that means that looking at your schedule, your course schedule, your class schedule, or your work schedule, and managing the time appropriately. Because if you do that, the level of stress that you feel will actually be reduced over time. You have to find better ways to cope. Be honest. Be realistic. This means that you cannot say, I'm going to set a schedule. After you listen to this virtual workshop, you're going to feel all gung-ho. I'm going to set a schedule and I'm going to stick to it. If you have made a schedule in the past and you did not stick to it, don't bother. Try to rework it. Try to see what actually works for you. Like we said early on in this presentation, think about the past when you were stressed. Well, how did you get over that? And how can you put that into play right now in your life? If you think about the future, what kind of things might come up that are stressful? Maybe next semester you have to take more than one class face-to-face during COVID. Maybe next semester you're going to increase your workload at your job. Understand that you have to really think about what works, what doesn't, and prioritize. And then, of course, in the physical sense, take good care of yourself. Rest, eat well, try not to smoke, avoid or limit the alcohol that you drink. Because again, a lot of these things can influence that autonomic activity, which then again can lead to stress. Or on the flip side, it can falsely tell you that you're relaxed when in fact you're just more avoiding. Other ways, try out new ways of thinking. Try to walk into new situations more optimistic. Try to walk into situations more open. Try to increase your social interactions with instructors, whether it be through email or virtual. Try to interact your interactions in virtual classes, maybe with classmates. Because what you have to do is figure out how you can approach the world from a different perspective. Learn to say no to things like things that may lead to procrastination. Learn to say no to picking up that extra shift for a friend. Learn to say no to family members when they ask you to do something that might take priority, that they think should take priority over academics or something that you think is more important. And lastly, ask for help. People who have strong network always manage stress better. Reach out to friends, reach out to family, and more importantly, reach out to the specific source. If you're stressed in a class, reach out to your instructor. If you're stressed at work, speak with your manager or your supervisor. These are so important. But again, these are skills that you have to develop over time because, as most of us probably know, asking for help is a lot more difficult than just walking up and talking. Other ways that we could practice: deep breathing, shoulder shrugs, focused breathing. If you go to Google and you search deep breathing techniques, if you look up focused breathing, all of these can be found. They can be guided through audio files. You can watch them on YouTube. And it's so important to practice these things because the more and more you practice, the more likely you are to put them into play in your life. Shoulder shrugs is something that you've seen people do when they get stressed and they do that little shoulder shrug and move their neck around. That might be out of frustration, but the reason why people do that as a natural reaction to stress is because it works. So if you take some time to do this before the stress reaches a level of, frustration, that shoulder shrug will have a completely different meaning than doing it in response to somebody or a student or a classmate or a family member. Take time out. Something that's enjoyable and take 10 seconds. This is not take a minute. This is not take 30 minutes. This is not watch something on Netflix. This is take 10 seconds. Admire what you like about a situation, a picture, a person. Breathe deeply and take a time out. Because again, a clear mind will help with that psychological reaction to stress and that cognitive reactions to stress. And then again, Google this, please. Progressive relaxation, or you can actually Google guided relaxation. And what this does is this actually provides you an audio file or even sometimes a video of how to tense your body and relax it in almost a massaging way, where you start with your toes and clenching and releasing, your calves with clenching and releasing, all your muscles in your body that essentially will lead to a level of relaxation, not only through kind of the physical relief of stress by tensing and releasing, but also the cognitive, because it requires so much attention for you to focus on. And again, be realistic. Do not pull yourself into too many directions. Do not overcommit yourself. Do not believe that you can do everything when it has not worked for you in the past. Make sure you identify what's important. You prioritize the things that are higher on your list, and you make sure that you're kind of reducing the amount of cognitive stress that you put on yourself. And of course, exercise. Any form of exercise is good. Walking around a neighborhood, standing at a desk, anything that can kind of get your blood flowing will always be great. Always try to reach that 30 minutes a day. And I promise you that if you can sit down and watch an episode of something on Netflix, if you can watch something on YouTube, if you can play a game on your phone or on your computer, you definitely have 30 minutes in the day. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Stress is a very real thing that you deal with as a student and non-student alike. Sometimes it's way too much to handle alone, so utilize your resources. Talk to your friends, your family members. You can speak with faith leaders. You may also want to see a counselor or psychologist. Online support through College of the Mainland is provided through ulifeline.org/com. And if you want to attend more of a personal approach, you can always make an appointment with a counselor by emailing counseling@com.edu. Do not wait to ask for help. All right, let's get into the student Q&A. So the first question I got was, how can students help advocate for mental health and overcome the stigma surrounding it? The easiest way to do this is to talk about it. Advocating for mental health always starts with being able to address your personal mental health and the mental health of other people around you. So for many, many years, and even within some groups now, speaking about mental health is still seen as kind of a negative thing. It's very hidden. People notice your mental health, but it's not something we talk about. So it's important to overcome the stigma by merely asking, how are you doing? And being prepared for negative emotions, being prepared for negative answers, just as much as we're ready for the positive ones. And a lot of this comes with just listening. Most people are uncomfortable with negative emotions. Most people want to provide advice, but a lot of times to advocate for mental health means to advocate for self-reflection. So you sit, you listen, and you provide sources of help. If the situation seems out of their control, do not be afraid to suggest them, maybe you should talk to a counselor. Maybe you should talk to a family member. Maybe you should talk to a therapist. Because if we can start to kind of overcome this negativity of maybe you should talk to a therapist, it will eventually become more and more easy for us to discuss mental health, to provide the resources, and not only that, to have people seek out the help itself. Next, somebody asked, how can I overcome procrastination and reduce academic stress? The first thing you have to do is admit that you're bad at planning. Once you get out of the way, you can change. This is important because when you admit that you're bad at planning, you can then be realistic and search out sources that can help you. Meaning that, there are so many schedules, so many plans online, so many instructors that you can reach out to help with this. But if we're providing you information that is not realistic for you, understand that it does require a little bit of effort on your own part, right? This means that if you know that you cannot sit for 2 hours straight doing classwork, whether that be because of work obligations, family obligations, relationship obligations, social interactions, that's totally fine. But what that means is that the time that you would otherwise set aside during those 2 hours should be split up over the week. So set it maybe 30 minutes a day. 1 day of prep work, 1 day of reading and understanding, 2 days of getting it done. And that's 4 days, a Monday through Thursday, kind of knock it out of the park. If you know that that's not possible, again, adjust it until you find what works for you. But once you find what works for you, do everything you can not to modify it. Because the moment that you do that, in that moment, it'll become easier to do it a second time and a third time and a fourth time until eventually your plan went out the window. And that's probably what happened with most of our plans in the past. So understand that you have to be realistic. You have to stick to your schedule. And more importantly, understand that every minute that you put into succeeding in your academics now is a minute that you're putting into succeeding in your future goals. And once you start to understand that, on the flip side, you're going to understand every minute that you put towards procrastinating, every minute that you put towards putting off classwork, that's you putting off your future. And if you talk to anyone who has started college, dropped a class, dropped out, come back to college, dropped out, went to college, dropped out, and then are now back, the first thing you're going to tell you is don't give up. Because the reality is that your academic success can either take 2 to 4 years, or it can take 8 to 10 years. So be prepared to kind of understand your situation, what's realistic for you, and that your academic success is essentially leading towards your future goals. What is the difference between sadness and depression, and how do I know if I'm depressed? So first, sadness is mostly an emotion. We call it depression, or we say that we're depressed when we're just feeling a strong level of sadness. The diagnosis of depression or major depressive disorder is something different. It's more severe. So the main difference between the two is with the duration and the severity. The duration, sadness fades. Whether we were sad because of the loss of a loved one, because of breaking up, losing a job, failing a class, all these things can cause sadness in a person, but eventually we get over it. It fades through time. Where right now I can ask, when was the last time you were really sad? And you can think about that situation. But that sadness, while it lingers, has kind of faded. Whereas depression is more persistent. Depression is kind of this negative thinking lasting the majority of the day through most days in your life. The symptoms are very similar, but sadness will make life difficult, whereas depression will actively impair it. So if you're suffering from one of the symptoms of depression, like difficulty concentrating, you might be sitting in class and you kind of turn your head and you think about what's causing sadness in your life, a breakup, loss of a job, not getting the job you wanted, but then you can kind of click back into reality. Depression impairs our life because it becomes so persistent that we may never get that focus back. Maybe you've been so sad that you didn't want to get out of bed. And it took everything in you to say, oh, fine, I'm going to work. This is going to be horrible, but I'm going anyways. I'm going to school. I have to sit through this class. I don't want to, but I'm going to do it because I have to. That's sadness kind of making our life difficult. Depression, it comes with never getting out of the bed. Convincing yourself that getting out of this bed is not going to make anything better. So I need to stay here. Getting out of this bed is the worst of the two choices. So again, we have to kind of understand that what distinguishes these is the duration and the severity of the symptoms. They are difficult because they look the same. Every single person listening to this virtual workshop has at one point been so sad that they didn't want to eat or they overate. Everybody has been sad enough to where they couldn't focus, where they had a loss of energy, where they felt kind of not wanting to hang out with friends. I don't want to see anybody, get out of here. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they suffered from depression disorder, because you may have bounced back from that. It may have, again, duration, it may have faded. That being said, if at any time you feel as though you may be suffering from depression, contact a mental health provider. Seek out help through College of the Mainland's counseling services. Seek out a counselor or a psychologist that you trust. Or even if you're not ready to take that step, please speak with a friend, a family member, or even a faith leader. Because it's better for us to kind of seek out the help and utilize our resources than to just deal with it. Sadness, you may sit down and it may be a high level of sadness. Maybe if we think about the loss of a loved one, and they can kind of get you through that level of sadness. But, and again, hopefully not, it may also be that you're suffering from depression, and they will offer the support and the guidance to help you kind of deal with that disorder as well. So utilize your resources, seek out help, and understand that distinguishing the two is very difficult. And it's not something that you should do on your own. Never self-diagnose. Never diagnose with Google. Never diagnose because your friend said this is what they dealt with. Always seek out some professional help if you feel as though you're suffering from depression. And the next question, of course, the COVID-19 question, coronavirus question. How do I deal with stress, socializing, and schoolwork during quarantine? So first, I got the best bullet point up there of the whole presentation. 2020 has been the worst. I know for many of us, we had a completely different vision of what 2020 was going to be. Starting from New Year's Eve parties all the way to right now and about to end the semester and lead into the holidays and the breaks and all that stuff that we usually spend with family. So that being said, there's going to be no straightforward answer for everyone in regards to this question. You really need to identify what is possible with you, what you're comfortable with, and how you can intermix the two. So the stress comes from, again, unfamiliarity. It is not an inability to cope. It is an unfamiliarity with the situation. It is the idea that we are asking a lot of you, of your life, when in fact, everything is new, everything is novel. So the more that you learn how to identify the stressors, is it the quarantining process? Is it the virtual education? Is it occupational differences, family differences, not interacting with friends? I mean, what is it specifically that is stressing you out about quarantining, COVID-19, and kind of this entire year? Identify what you're comfortable with, because that will help you identify how you can change the situation. And more importantly, how do you intermix the two? Because you might be comfortable with going out, but you need to identify what's possible. Maybe your friends are not. You may be comfortable with kind of practicing social distancing, whereas you might have family members or friends who are not. So you have to make sure that you intermix them appropriately so that you can reduce the amount of stress that you feel in this new situation. And while many people hate to hear this, start to normalize it, because unfortunately, we don't know when kind of the end date of all of this is. So the more that you can start to identify the sources, understand what you're comfortable with, make changes, and normalize it, the better that you will be able to deal with the stress that comes with quarantining, COVID-19, and social distancing. In terms of socializing, it's very important. Do not stop socializing. Social distance meetings, again, if you're comfortable with, you can meet at parks, you can meet for walks. Again, being outside is very much the kind of recommendation at this point because of the novelty of the situation. And again, while not shutting people out, you also have to make sure that they're comfortable with the things you're comfortable with. So intermix those two. Creating a bubble, very important. Again, I've done this since the beginning of quarantine back in March. We have 2 families that we specifically created a bubble with, where those are our main people that we socialize with and that we hang out with. We understand the risks that come with that because of who they hang out with, their jobs, their occupations, our jobs, our occupations, and our social extracurricular activities. But those are our main groups, and we know that, again, starting from early on, that we could still develop a level of socializing while minimizing risks by not kind of having a free-for-all like we did in the past. As things start to open up, we see that changing a little. Our bubble is getting a little bit bigger. But again, find out what you're comfortable with. find out what they're comfortable with, intermix. The virtual meetups are kind of norm now. Book clubs, movie clubs, video games, all these things are important. But the best one I have on here is bring back phone calls. If you really want to surprise somebody and socialize with them in a very different way that unfortunately we don't use as often anymore, pick up a phone and call them. Not a text, not a FaceTime, not a Zoom, not a Teams, a phone call. Because the novelty of it sometimes does allow for a little bit more fun and a little bit of a kind of a different feeling when socializing with others. So be creative, identify what people are comfortable with, identify what you're comfortable with, mix it all up, and then again, always be aware of the risks that are associated. And then lastly, the schoolwork. I think we addressed that during the presentation itself, but that goes back to this idea that we should prioritize the academics in our life, prioritize the assignments that we have, and create a realistic plan to reduce the procrastination associated with it. And that concludes our PTK workshop on the mind, stress, and mental health. Again, I'm Professor Alvarez, and if you have any questions about this presentation or you would like to address anything that you heard here, please contact me through PTK, or you can reach me at dalvarez6@com.edu. Thank you again for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you, Professor Alvarez. Taking care of your mental health is very important, especially during these trying times. If yourself or anybody you know needs help, there are resources available at COM and within your community. If you need someone to talk to, there's counseling available at COM. To set up an appointment, email counseling@com.edu. Visit the Galveston County Office of Emergency Management for more resources specific to your needs at gcoem.org. Thank you for watching and supporting Phi Theta Kappa. Stay tuned for the next 2 videos of our 3-part series workshop.